Well, you can feel proud of that. Good morning, good morning, good morning. How are you today?
Great.
Awesome. Good. Good. I want you to feel good. I want you to breathe into the moment. I want you to open your hearts. Feel the presence of life moving through us, expressing as us, being. I'm grateful to be here today and to share some thoughts. You know, every once in a while, we get to talk about important things like God and life and how we live. And then sometimes we get to talk about other important things like money. And then I watch your little faces go stone cold. They go into poker mode. It's like, it's fine to talk about money in general, but when I start talking about your money, then all of a sudden we're into a whole different program, right? It's like what was Ronald Reagan said years ago, it's, a recession is when your friend loses his job, a depression is when you lose yours, right? So in October, we always like to celebrate this idea that we are abundant beings. We're preparing ourselves for the coming year. And so we come to you with this wonderful opportunity to share with us your planned giving for next year. And so you may have noticed commitment cards and all that sort of thing. And it's always fun for me because I've done this for a while. I know I look much too young to have done this for a while, but it's true. And it's really interesting that this whole dance we do with this thing called money, and how often we want to see it as somehow separate from our spiritual life. I don't know if you do that, but there's areas where I have my spiritual life and it's all there, and then there's this other area that kind of likes to want to live outside of that. So it's always this opportunity to look at how we are living in the flow. It's our whole theme for this year is living in the flow, allowing God to be God in and through and as me. And so I wanted to speak for a moment about this wonderful book, which is called The Soul of Money. And it's by Lynn Twist. And I don't know if you're familiar with it, but it's kind of in one of my must-read books. And it's a little different for us New Thought people because it's not about how do you create more prosperity or how do you open your consciousness to be receptive to greater good. It's not about aligning, all of that kind of stuff. It's really, although it is, it's really about this idea of having our finances be in alignment with our soul, with our values, with our purpose. You see, Lynn Twist was a wonderful, she still is a wonderful lady, but she was, doing the American dream. Married, nice guy, had a couple kids. He was on the fast track for creating an amazing business. In fact, one of the goals of their small collection of people was that they were going to be the first company of their kind to reach $1 billion in sales a year. They're going to be a $1 billion company. And they were moving quickly towards the goal. And so they were living what we might call the American dream. Big house, pool, nannies, cars. And so they were doing the things that sometimes our culture says, this is what you do. And through some moment of introspection, she just kind of had this what are we doing? While we're providing a great life for our kids, our nannies are spending the time with the kids. While we're into this place of having a beautiful home, we're looking at our next bigger home. And she said, there's sort of this realization that you might have is that no matter where you are on the journey, there's always something bigger, better, faster, flashier. Have you noticed that? And so, so she had this kind of moment of reckoning. She became engaged and involved with a program called the Hunger Project. And Hunger Project states as a purpose that it is ridiculous in a world as abundant as ours that there are people who are hungry.
Yes.
And so they have worked to change the systems and the ideas and the consciousness to have that be an idea that no longer serves us. So through this process of revelation and introspection, she just realized, like, somehow these ideals that we held for ourselves about what our life would look like feels like there's an incongruence between what we say we value and how we're living our life. Not that they were doing anything wrong, nothing wrong with having wealth, nothing wrong with accumulation, but it was that recognition that it was kind of becoming about what's the next bigger, more fabulous vacation where we can take our kids to play with the nannies. What's the bigger car? What's the bigger house? What's the bigger, the fancier, more opulent thing? And it was just this moment of, is this in alignment with our values? And so they looked at this and said, wait a minute, what we are doing, there's nothing wrong with being successful. And yet, what if we had this shift in how do we distribute our resources? You see, she did not decide, well, we're just going to go move into a yurt and do the, granola and whatever people do in yurts. I don't know. Right? It wasn't that kind of a thing. It was just a realignment of how are we spending our time? How are we spending our energy? What is most important to us? How are we making a difference in the world? And so she became involved with the Hunger Project, and she started looking at how could I make a difference in that I have an opportunity to connect with influential people. I have an opportunity to be in circles. How can I do that? And so she became a fundraiser for the Hunger Project, and it changed her life. She began to see how so much of what we just take for granted is such a luxury for so many people around the world. And the things that we could do if we got in alignment. She says that when you understand that the soul of money offers a way to realign our relationship with money to be more truthful, free, and patient, enabling us to live in integrity and full expression that is consistent with our deepest core values, no matter what our circumstances are. No matter what our current circumstances are. You see, there is an illusion that we often hold that when we get to this different place, that somehow we will be different. Then we're really going to kick it. If one more person comes to me and says, when I win the lottery, Marty, don't worry about a thing. I'm going to take care of the mortgage. Which I'm still accepting. I'm still good with that. But that's not the program we're looking for, right? It's like, what are you doing now? Jesus spoke to his people, and he taught about this idea that God gives more to those who take care of what they have, right? Sometimes we're like, if I only had 50 acres, I could really grow some stuff. It's like, do you have a pot that you can put on your balcony and grow something? Try that. See how you do with that and go from there, right? This is nothing new to any of us, but it's just that idea. Because I think we're often caught in the culture in which we live that reinforces an idea over and over and over that more is better. So she says, in a wonderful chapter on the falsity of scarcity. We'll talk more about this in a couple weeks, but this idea that there's some myths, some toxic myths she talks about around money. And the first one she says is, there's not enough. And that's a consciousness idea. There is not enough. And so how often do we go through our lives with that idea that there's not enough? That we need more. And when we're in that place of consciousness, then we're seeking the more. We're waiting for our lives to start. We're thinking that there's not enough, and I hope I can get mine. And that's where we move into sometimes crossing a line that's not in alignment and integrity with who we are. Because if there's not enough, I may have to skirt the truth a little bit. I may have to shade something. I may have to do some things. I may have to, change a couple things on my tax. I may not, all of the ways that we can show up in an idea that there's not enough, so I've got to get mine. The very basic principle that we teach in Unity and in New Thought is that God is the source and the substance of all that is. You ever heard that? Tell me I'm not the first person that told you this. Right? So why are we stressed? Why are you stressed? Right? Except that we get into our own little thinking about, like, I know God's got the universe, but there's my life. And I'll manage that. I'll make that work, right? But when we start to realize that God is the source and the substance and the sufficiency of all that is, we open ourselves into a more expanded way of being that lives in the flow. You see, the idea, the word abundance comes from the Latin, which means to flow. And so I like that idea that when we're living in the flow, we're recognizing that God is all there is the source, is the substance, is the creative intelligence, and we are just co-creative beings with that. And while we are here on this dimension that we call Earth, having this human experience, we act as if it's our stuff. We act as if it's our body, our house, mine, right? And the truth is, it's all on loan, right? You got to give it back. As they say, you cannot take it with you. Although some people are trying to figure out, Bill's still working on that one. He's not completely convinced, but he's, right? And so when we move into that idea, then we recognize we're but stewards of life. And so the way we approach life is that there is enough. There is more than enough. Do you know how much money is in the world? I don't either, but it's a lot. It's a lot. Gazillion, trillion, something or others. I don't even know how many zeros that is, but there's a lot. And it flows. And it flows to some and not to others. And so when we look at that, we might think, well, that's because God likes some and doesn't like others. Except then you decided to be a unity person that said God is the living presence of all that is, and it is a principle and not a person, so it's not rewarding and punishing, but rather operating according to our own awareness and understanding. And so when Jesus was speaking to us, he was saying, I have come that you might have life, and that you might have it more abundantly, that you might be in that flow, that there is enough. It is our systems and our ways of not being in the flow and not recognizing source and not recognizing who we are that creates the limitation. So we work within our own consciousness. I was sharing in class the other night about when we started this church in Dallas 25 years ago. And it was sort of a... You know how God sometimes surprises you with what you thought you were praying for, but it shows up in a completely different way? So I was invited to start a new church, and which is a nice way to say I was fired from the church I was at. And so all of a sudden, me and a group of people kind of found ourselves like, now what do we do? And so we started visioning, and we started working around this idea, and we just started. Got some people together. We began to really listen to what Spirit was calling us to do, and we began to look at how could we put this together, and we got clear it's time to do that. And so we met in some churches for a while. We had declared a day. It was Easter. So that's a good day to have church. Let's do that. And lo and behold, if people didn't show up, we had like 100 people that showed up. We're like, well, guess we should do this. Bunch of kids, let's do this. So we met in church, in hotels for a little bit, and finally we landed on a place, and we were able to negotiate something that worked for us, and we had nothing. I mean, we started that thing with a dream and $1,300. Crazy, huh? And so I had a desk chair that looked actually it was not padded. So, and I had a desk that looked very similar to a folding table, and it was bare bones. And so we started envisioning, and we started putting together an acceptance list. An acceptance list. The things we are willing to accept to house and to furnish this place that we had created. And so we did that, and so we just kept working. And one of the wonderful board members and leadership council members of that came to me and said, as we were looking at who do we want to be, see, we started not just like, let's do church, but who do we want to be? What are the spiritual qualities that we want to live from that allow us to experience this spiritual life on earth? And so we looked at spirituality and love and compassion. And one guy said, can we just add the quality of ease? You see, when you start working from this place, it is not how do I manifest stuff, how do I get stuff. It's about who do I need to be? How do I resonate with who I am so that life can flow through me? So lo and behold, before too long, another member of the church said, my wife works for FEMA. And FEMA is this wonderful part of our government that when these hurricanes and disasters come, they swoop in. And so they have warehouses full of stuff ready to go, because you never know when hurricanes are going to hit or all the other natural disasters. And from time to time, they replenish those. She said, let me check. So one day, they was like, yeah, we got stuff. We got a lot of stuff. So one day, we have 2 U-Haul vans trucks pull up, full of stuff. Conference tables and chairs and real desks and, Post-it note. I mean, it was like, oh my goodness, right? In fact, we had so much that after it was all over, we had a garage sale for the overflow. So we actually made money off that donation. Right? So I was always so grateful for the person. It was easy. Have you noticed how sometimes we complicate our life? Maybe you don't. I'll just speak for myself. But sometimes I complicate my life. I forget that God is my source and that life is designed to flow. And so when I move back into that awareness, I come to the awareness that Spirit is flowing, that there is enough. Jesus spoke to this. If you read the passages, he spoke to it over and over and over. So that's the first myth that we want to bust. The second one we want to look at is this idea that more is more. Again, we live in a culture, and that's where she found herself in that rat race of like, more would be better, except when does it become enough? I remember living in Sun Valley, Idaho, there's some really wealthy people there. I was not one of them, but I met some of them. And these homes. And so I remember one day I was driving by this area called Golden Eagle. It's beautiful, beautiful, beautiful homes. And I was looking at this house, and it had to be 12,000 square feet. My quick estimation. And they were adding on. And my little mind was like, what did you forget? The golf course? I mean, what is it that was missing? So I have no judgment about that. It was just like, sometimes you just go, when you see real wealth, you're like, okay, right? The point being that if we are into that idea that I need more, she talks about this idea of how the person making $40,000 a year stresses about the change of job, just like the CEO making $5 million a year, looking at, is this golden parachute going to be enough? And we can't conceive, but it's the same mindset, isn't it? It's not the amount. When we start to realize that money is a neutral, it's a neutral. And so if you think that more money is going to make you more happy, we got to look at how this works. becoming happy creates the space for other things to happen. And sometimes, we're talking about this as well in class, about sometimes the demonstration, the healing comes in a physical change of the body, physical change of circumstance, and sometimes it just becomes in a shift in perception. We start to realize what is. I've done a lot of funerals in my years, and so I've visited any number of people on those closing days of this chapter, and I've yet to have anybody go, geez, I wish I'd spent more time at the office. You know, I had this spreadsheet that was magnificent, and if I just had another day, I could have added that next thing, and we could have really looked at the flow of how, nobody does that. They look at what mattered. I wish I would have forgiven. I wish I would have asked for forgiveness. I wish I would have said, I love you. I wish I would have completed something that was incomplete. You see, so when it comes down to it, when we start to remember that we are actually just all stewards of this life, stewards of this body, that we are going to give it back, it starts to change things. And we realize that, can I be happy now? Not that there's anything wrong with creating more, but am I happy now? Am I doing what's important now? Or am I moving into a consciousness that says that when this happens or that happens or when I reach this level, boy, then I'm going to really take it easy. There's a lot of men who have heart attacks or die shortly after they retire. And part of that is because men in particular, broad generalizations, but men in particular identify with their work. This is who I am. And so when they don't have that, who am I now? Women, on the other hand, often, in broad generalizations, identify with being a mom. Right? Can't tell you how many women I've asked, how are you? Great, the kids are doing great. Okay? really is a question about you, but that's good, a nice information to know, right? So that idea that who I am is what I do or what I accomplish or what I create or all that sort of thing is just part of that. When we realize that who I am in this moment is what matters. How am I showing up for life today is what matters. And then the last myth, she says, is this idea that that's just the way it is. Anybody ever said that? Yeah, we are. It is what it is. That's just the way it is. We can't change everything, right? And so, hear me if you ever say this. You're looking at a belief system that you hold. It is not scriptural. It is not work. It's, for you New Agey people, it's not even in the Akashic records. Right? It's just an idea that we hold. And when we do that, we think that we can't change life. And I think, as Lawrence sang to so beautifully, this is a time for change. This is a time for evolution. This is a time for us to realize and recognize who we are, why we're here, and what we're accomplishing. And it can all be different, but it starts with a change in mind, a change in consciousness. So in her work, in working with this hunger project, she realized that these three myths so often are the things that are preventing massive change from happening in the world. We believe we can't do anything about it, so we don't do anything about it. When we shift and we realize there's enough, there's an all-sufficiency. And that more is not necessarily more. You see, we don't need to necessarily have everybody else do what we do. We're learning. We're growing. So in this work, she began to ask for a lot of money. Right? It's what you do when you're a fundraiser. You ask for people's money. It's what you do when you're a minister. Everyone was interviewed for a sales job, and they said, well, I see you have all this ministry experience, but can you sell? I said, I get people to give me their money and they don't even get anything in exchange for it. Can I sell? Of course I can sell, right? We invest in an idea. We invest in an idea that 45 years ago some people said, how about if we had a new thought? A church in that liberal bastion of Charlotte, North Carolina. Right? We don't even know who all those people are. Some of you that have been here for a while know different chapters of the thing, but the verse keeps going. The song keeps going, and we keep adding a verse to it. And so we are in that idea of investing in this idea of spiritual community that hopefully outlives all of us, that transcends, and so that this young little lady sitting over there is going to come in here and get married one of these days. Maybe not this facility. It's so weird because it happens. I'm telling you, it happens. Right? And so we invest in that idea. But she got good at asking, and I'll talk about this in a couple weeks. There's some great stories around getting clear about what we're asking for and who we ask for and from. You see, we take an approach that this is our church, so we support it. Is that wild? Is that crazy? I mean, is that just like radical stuff? I don't think so. So it's not to squeeze you for your last dime. It's not to manipulate you into something. See, these are the times when I wish, like, oh, gosh, that Baptist upbringing could be so helpful right now. But oh no, we had to be all enlightened. You can be a choice. You can do whatever you want, blah, 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 right? But when you get it and you start living from the flow, you just realize you're a steward and all that you do is just flowing with life. And that the money becomes the spiritual practice. When our money is in alignment with who we are, it's just a spiritual practice. So she has this wonderful thing that they worked from, this idea, and I love this because it's true for us. She said the Hunger Project drew its power for social action from the principles of personal transformation and empowering self-inquiry. The questions they ask themselves, questions we might ask ourselves. Who do I need to be to fulfill the commitments that I've made? Who do I need to be to fulfill the commitments that I've made? What kind of human being do I need to forge myself into to make this happen? And what resources do I need to be willing to bring to bear in myself and my colleagues and in my world? Those are different questions. Those are not about going and getting. Those are about becoming. Who do I need to be as a human being to bring greater light, greater love, greater joy, greater abundance to the world? That's the work. And we enjoy every phase of the journey. It's a beautiful thing. So I've really come to love this idea. The subtitle of this book, The Soul of Money, is called Reclaiming the Wealth of Our Inner Resources. What we do with our money is part of the outer, but how we approach living, and money is a part of living, in case you hadn't noticed. So it's just a part of what we do. But how do we develop our inner resources to be in the flow, to live, to be expansive, to experience this kingdom on earth? So next week, David will be here and we'll talk again about this. So I just want you to be with this idea of what is my highest vision for my life? And how do I need to grow in order to realize that? Isn't that cool? Let's take a moment to pray together, shall we? As we simply breathe into this awareness, into this understanding that there is but one life, one power, one presence. As we remember that the very life that we live is the life of the divine, the very breath that we breathe is the divine breathing through us. that we are a part of this magnificent whole. We speak of being unity, united with the one. So we open our hearts in this moment, we open our minds. We simply allow ourselves to be transformed by the renewal of our spiritual consciousness. We speak the word of truth this day as we remember who we are. We claim wholeness for ourselves. We allow that health and wholeness to reveal itself through every aspect of our life, through our physical being, as health and vitality, and at every level of consciousness. We allow ourselves to remember that we are indeed abundant beings, that we are living in a flow, and so we open ourselves to be good stewards, to receive graciously and to give generously. We allow love to be the overriding consciousness. We freely and fully forgive ourselves and each other, that we might realize more perfectly the truth of who we are. We move confidently in the world because we are divinely guided and guarded. And so I'm grateful to stand in this truth. I'm grateful to share this wisdom. I'm reminded of those words that before you ask, I shall answer. The solution is already known. So let us give thanks for it. Let us recognize in this moment the blessings of our lives. And let us extend those blessings to our brothers and sisters around the planet, to the planet itself, seeing a world at peace and a world that works for all. We speak the word of truth as we bless all of those. We bless all priests, rabbis, ministers, teachers of all faiths. For we recognize and know there are many pathways to the divine, and therefore we honor them. It is good. And so in joy and gratitude, then I'm simply speaking this word of truth. I'm knowing that it is so, and I'm releasing it into that divine law, bringing forth the highest good for all. And so in joy and gratitude, I simply allow it to be so, as together we say, and so it is. Amen.